I was originally a Liberal member of the Liberal Party, and I believe that the Liberal values lined up with my values. And over that 12 years, one by one they slipped away. And the final straw came during COVID. To think that a Liberal government would force an Australian citizen with threat of losing their jobs to undergo a compulsory medical intervention was not the Liberal Party that I wanted to be part of. And to think that they were telling doctors what drugs they could and could not prescribe. It was also doctors coming to me saying, this is the first time ever this has happened to us. And that was another reason I couldn't stay with the Liberal Party. There are other reasons I was very upset about things over their energy policy. And I just felt I had no other alternative than to firstly run as an independent. That was my aim. And then Mr. Clive Palmer came to me and said, Craig, you just can't run as an independent. He said, it's too important for the nation. At this next election, we've got to run hard on the policy issues all the way up to the election campaign. He said, I'll back you. We'll put 150 candidates into the field. And that was an offer that I couldn't refuse. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. And now I find myself here probably where I always belonged with the Libertarian Party. So that's great. So look, I've got a bit of a PowerPoint presentation. I'll go through it quickly. I'll go through what I think is one of the major differences between the Liberal Party, Labor Party, and the Libertarian Party. So Ram, do you want to fire away, or I can do it? That one, do it, okay. So here's my first picture with Mr. Duck and Mr. Albanese. Both of them are 100% committed to the Paris target. Both of them are 100% committed to net zero. Now I'd like to go through what this is doing to our economy. This first graph I'll start with. This shows our coal-fired power stations. It starts down here in 2009, 2010, when we had almost 30 gigawatts of coal-fired power. You can see the orange ones here in South Australia. And as they've closed down, they progressively closed down to see where we are now, just over 20 gigawatts of coal-fired power stations, and the trajectory of where we're going. So we knew as a nation back in 2010 that this was happening. You can see South Australia lost all their coal-fired power stations back before 2014, 2015. And what did that do to South Australia? It gave it the highest electricity prices in the nation and some of the highest electricity prices in the world. This is a more up-to-date graph showing the same thing. This is where we are with Liddell closing down here in 2023. Liddell, that's the orange bar there. So we're at about 23 gigawatts. We're now down to 21 gigawatts. You can see as we come out, we've got more closures planned. Vales Point, Clyde B, Arari takes us down to 15 megawatts. Gigawatts. Bayswater and Gladstone closing down in about a decade's time will take us down under 10 gigawatts. So although our population has been increasing, our coal-fired power stations have been going downhill. Now what's that done? Back in 2017, I was part of the Energy Committee for the Coalition. I argued we cannot just allow the Liddell power station to close down because it will push up electricity prices. And 10 years later, or 7 years later, I sit here and say I was 100% correct on that. We've removed the dispatchable power from the grid, pushed up our electricity prices. Now, what's happened to our electricity prices since Kevin Rudd got into power in 2007? We start here at the year 2000. The orange line is the CPI. You can see that gradually going up, and then it kicks up over the last couple of years. And the blue line is how electricity prices have gone up. You can see as soon as Kevin Rudd got in, the renewable crate started, electricity prices started to rise much quicker than did the general CPI. And you can see it's taken off even further. This one shows us Australia versus the USA for electricity prices. Now, this is only one of the most important graphs because we have to be, as a nation, if we're going to be a wealthy, prosperous nation, we've got to be internationally competitive. And electricity used to be our nation's advantage. We had some of the lowest electricity prices and costs in the world, so that enabled industry to set up and run here. That enabled those industries to pay high wages and to pay taxes, and to pay the revenue, and create high-paying jobs. But what happened since, again, you can see here from about 2000 to 2007, we sort of pegged along with the USA, and then you can see our electricity prices have shot up, as where the US electricity prices have remained relatively stable up until Biden was elected. But as we sit here today, electricity prices are at least double, and depending on the states, triple what they are in Australia compared to the USA today. So that's why we see industry leaving our shores. We've got China as well we're trying to compete against. We're losing industry to the US. So this is how we've lost our nation's competitiveness, because we've given away that natural competitive advantage. So what's that done to incomes? This is a graph of real per capita household incomes. Starts here when Kevin Rudd was first elected, with the index of 100. And these are previous recessions that we've had. The black line is the current GDP per capita recession. So Albanese has been elected, so Albanese elected here. Since Albanese has been elected, real household incomes have declined 8%. This is the biggest decline in real incomes in our nation's history that has occurred under Mr. Albanese's policies. Now, while we're doing this and causing these self-inflicted wounds to us, what are our friends over in communist China doing? This is a graph of Chinese coal-fired power stations, how they've increased it. Starts off at the year 2000. Now, currently, they've got 1,147 gigawatts of coal-fired power stations. That's the fleet. We've got 21. They've also got an extra, since the Paris Agreement was signed, they've opened up 267 gigawatts. That's more than 10 times our entire fleet. And the last one over there, the 421, that's what they've got under development and construction today. So just think about that. We've got 21 gigawatts we're trying to close down. China's got 1,147 plus another 421 gigawatts under construction and development. 20 times what we have that we are trying to close down. This graph was out the other day, and it's getting, they're actually coal-fired pipeline is actually increasing. Last year, they started construction on almost 100 gigawatts of new coal-fired power stations. Remember, that's 5 times what we've got, which we're planning to close down over the next 15 to 20 years. They started 100 gigawatts in 1 year, just one single year. You can see that was more than 2023, more than 2022, more than 2021. And this is a mix of Chinese energy consumption. Those that say there's this energy transition going on, and China's giving away fossil fuels and coal. Again, from starting in 2000 up to 2023, you can see oil, coal, gas is getting larger and larger. Every year they're using more and more. By the way, the wind is this tiny little one up here, and the solar is this tiny little one up there. That's China's current energy mix and how it's been growing and increasing. Annual CO2 emissions, Australia versus China. We're the red line down the bottom, and you can see right down the bottom, this is tiny little bit that we've reduced our CO2 emissions. It's come at an enormous cost. And you can see China's emissions skyrocketing through the roof. Now, what's that done to our GDP and GDP per capita? Now, GDP is the size of the economy. GDP per capita is the individual's share. So as we get more population, GDP per capita shrinks because you've got to cut the pie up into more pieces, and each piece gets smaller. So for the last 7 quarters, you can see here these blue lines. GDP per capita, that means each individual Australian share of the economic pie has been shrinking. And what have Labor done to try and mask that? They've had to pump up the immigration numbers to try and keep GDP above going into recession. But what really counts for, if you're running a large corporation, you want to see a bigger population. GDP, total GDP counts if you're in charge of Woolworths. If the average citizen, what counts is GDP per capita, and that is going backwards 7 quarters in a row in this nation. Now, what's the consequence of that? This one should go. These numbers down the bottom, this is from Labor's first budget in October 2022. So these are the budget papers. And they estimated here we would have net overseas migration for 2022-2023, 235,000 for both years. So that's 400 70,000 for the first 2 years of the Labor government. That's what was in their own budget papers. That's not the coalition budget papers. That is the government budget papers. But because the economy was going so badly, they had to pick up our immigration numbers. So you can see here again, this is where we are. 2024 was up there. It was about 500,000 net migration intake. Last year was about 460 net migration. So those last 2 years combined, we had a net migration intake of close to 1 million people. Now remember, the budget papers said it was going to be 470. They more than doubled it to 1 million. And you can see how off the charts those numbers are. You can see from the end of the Second World War through to the Sydney Olympics, through to here, our annual migration net numbers averaged around 80,000. We've kicked it up to over 500,000. Now what consequences does that have? Firstly, just explain the difference between net migration and total migration. So net migration is the number of people that come into the country versus the people that leave. So the total number over the last 2 years, it's actually been 1.4 million new people have migrated to Australia in the last 24 months, and 400,000 have departed. So that's where we get the million from. So what happens if you bring 1 million people into the country the size of Australia in 2 years? We simply can't keep up with the infrastructure. So Albanese says, no problem, I'll set a housing target of 240,000 dwellings. Well, you're going pretty well, Albo, you're not even close to it. We've never been close to that. We've got no hope of getting there, because not only have you got to build these extra dwellings, you've got to build new schools, you've got to build new hospitals, you've got to build new infrastructure, roads, bits and pieces. So try and, as anyone knows, try and get a tradesman or a labourer to try and do some construction work. Prices are through the roof. So we're nowhere near this housing target we need. So what happens then? It's quite simple. Firstly, Albanese says, it's easy, we just build more houses. We already are the world champion when it comes to building houses. This graph here shows the annual dwellings completed per 100,000 people. Australia, Canada, US and the UK. We're the world champions at the moment of building houses, and have been for the last 2 decades. So the idea that we can sort of all of a sudden increase this to some number to catch up on the migration rates just simply is not going to happen. Another graph here, this was published in the UK. Again, it shows we're second to Switzerland at the number of new houses built per 1,000 people in the past decade. So don't let anyone tell you that the problem is, we're just not putting enough new houses. Right? We've built more new houses than anyone else in the world. And this is an interesting graph that was on today, I saw today. You always think that we build all these high-rise apartments because the high-rise apartments are actually cheaper than a freestanding house. That's no longer the case. This graph here is the most accurate. This is housing construction prices. Townhouses is the grey, detached single houses is the red, and apartments is the blue. So it's costing more now in construction to build apartments than it is to build new detached houses. And yet the scheme all our local councils, our state governments have, is to build these high-rise constructions throughout Sydney near the railway stations, and the prices of these things have gone through the roof. And as the migration rates pick up, and we simply can't build enough houses, what happens? The price of rents go up. You can see this here, starting in about 2001. The rents for houses and units go up through the roof. So any Australian renting is getting absolutely smashed on the cost of their first cost of living, is their rent has gone up through the roof. You can see that there. That's the consequence of having an excess number of migration when you don't build the houses. That's exactly the same for housing prices. So what's happening? We now have a situation where kids that are growing up in Sydney, born in Sydney, grow up in Sydney, can find they can no longer afford to buy a house in the city they grew up in. So we had last year, we've got more people leaving Sydney that are coming into the place with net migration. So you've got a natural increase here of 285,000. That's that's births, but we've got 38,000 last year left Sydney because of the costs were too high. And your population increase is all being pushed up here. This one is net overseas migration, 156,000 people extra coming into Sydney in just 1 year's time. And why are we doing this? This is all because of this climate change theory that we have. Okay, now, many people go, oh yes, we've got to stick with this net zero. We've got to punish ourselves because we've got to hit that net zero target. Well, always ask someone, if we get to net zero by 2050, how much will that actually avert in warming? How much warming? You're a believer, you believe that CO2 works as a control knob to the temperature? How much warming will we avert? Well, these guys have done the numbers. And they say, if the entire world, that's China as well, which is not going to do it, and India, but if the entire world gets to net zero by 2050, the warming avoided on their own IPCC numbers is 0.07 of 1 degree Celsius. So that's less than 1/10 of 1 degree. And that is if every single nation sticks to this net zero policy. The whole thing is completely and utterly insane. And where's it going to head us? You will own nothing and you'll be happy. That's where our country is heading. We are heading to be a poor third world nation, a socialist economy with an expenditure bill that we no longer have the income to finance. That is where we're heading. It'll be the first time in our nation's history, the way we're heading, that we're going to leave our kids and our grandkids less prosperous than what we were. That is the direction that this policy statements. And just a couple of things, I'll finish off with a couple of quick climate graphs. People say, oh, there's a climate emergency, Well, this graph here shows the number of deaths from climate emergencies per averaged out per decade. And you can see here, down the bottom, 2020, the fact is, the world has never been safer from climate disasters at any time in human history. It's a 97% decline over the last century. We're brainwashing kids in school, telling them, this is terrible, the climate's going to kill you all, you've got no future. They should be showing kids this graph and saying, guys, you're living at the safest time in human history. But they're giving them this complete nonsense, brainwashing them with this. A couple of quick other graphs, they say, all these climate disasters having all this cost. This graph is done from, it's insurance data from Munich Re and World Bank. And what it shows is the losses, the climate weather disaster losses as a percentage of GDP. So as global GDP increases, there's more construction, there's more boats, there's more yachts, there's more expensive houses. So that's the way you have to look at it. Is the percentage of GDP from climate disasters increasing or decreasing? You can see here the red dotted line, it's slightly decreasing. So this idea again that this is climate disaster, with all these disasters costing us all these trillions and billions of dollars, it's actually getting less, it's actually getting better. We also hear this thing about, the world's on fire, they tell the children, they hold the banners up, and the world's on fire. This graph is the total wildfire burn area measured by the amount of CO2 emissions that go up. This is done by satellites, right? Again, it's a decreasing trend. So the idea that the world's on fire and bushfires are getting worse and natural fires are getting worse around, the data, the real data, satellite data shows the exact opposite. And the real climate thing we need to be concerned about is cold. 9 times more people around the globe, almost in every single country, 9 times more people die from cold weather than they do hot weather. It is cold deaths that we should be concerned about, and we can eliminate those by providing people with cheap, low-cost electricity and heating costs. But we're doing the opposite. I'll leave it one final one. All these policies about net zero and climate change, every single one of them hands out either economic, political, or military advantage to the communist Chinese. You think about every single policy. At the moment, Our Chinese are quite happy to use our coal as they build coal-fired power stations. We're closing them down. Our industry moves offshore to China. Where do we get all this? We subsidise all the solar panels, we subsidise all the wind turbines. Where do they come? Billions of dollars worth of imports from communist China. They are getting stronger economically, military and politically as our wealth is transferred out of this country over the communist Chinese. And that's what we are facing. We need to put Australian interests first when it comes to this, abandon these nonsense policies, otherwise we're going to find ourselves on the end of the Chinese communists' boot. And that's just quickly the few things that I put up tonight, but the Libertarian policy on this is to get rid of all the subsidies. Right? If wind and solar are so cheap as they tell us, let's get rid of the subsidies. Let's make sure electricity is priced correctly. Because at the moment it's not the way. It's the so-called market they have is a completely artificial market that all gets to build up to favour intermittent generation. Right? Let's get rid of that. Let's make sure that we get the base load power into the grid that we need that can get electricity costs down. The paper out the other day showed we can get costs down at least 25% if we could get back and we could build new coal-fired power stations. Now it's both the Labor and Liberal Party, neither of them want to have any more coal-fired power stations built in this country. When President Trump won and had a couple of weeks ago signed all those executive orders, and he said we're going to scrap Paris, we're going to scrap net zero, and we're going to drill baby drill, that handed to Peter Dutton on a platter, an absolute platter, that he could have gone in there and said, look, I've really supported net zero, we Liberal supported it, right? But the world's changed, circumstances have changed, and when circumstances change, we have to reevaluate our policies, and we're going to at least reevaluate our policies. He didn't say that. He just said, no, we've all signed up to Paris, we're sticking ahead, and we're going to build nuclear power stations. Now, I believe we eventually should build nuclear power stations in this country. I had the Lucas Heights reactor down there at Lucas Heights in my electorate. I was the only member of Parliament with a nuclear reactor in this electorate. It was about 5 k's away from my office. So I spent a lot of time down there talking and learning from the people, the nuclear scientists. My view on nuclear power is we've got to get rid of all the prohibitions that we have, take those out of the laws, but rather than actually build nuclear power tomorrow, which is Liberal Party policy, we should be investing in research and development to get the next generation of technology. That is what we should be aiming for. When we built that nuclear reactor in my electorate, how do you guess what country we went to for the technology? Argentina. We had to get Argentina to come and build us a nuclear reactor because we didn't have the technology here in Australia. We should set up a 25-year, a quarter of a century plan to try and be one of the leading nations in nuclear research. Rather than just be the world's biggest depository of uranium, let's try and be the best nuclear nation there is, and let's try and target the next generation of nuclear power stations, the small modular nuclear reactors, rather than roll out the current what's available off the shelf, because that is not going to give us an economic advantage. And anyone that runs a business here knows every day you think about, how can I get an advantage over my competitors? We have to think like that as a nation as well. We have to think, no one owes Australia a living. We've got to get out there on the international playing field and compete for it. And we've got to fight for it. We've got to make sure what can we do to give ourselves a competitive advantage. Our competitive advantage is that beautiful black coal seam that runs down our eastern seaboard. Our competitive advantage is the gas that we have. Our competitive advantage is we have the biggest depositories of uranium. They're our competitive advantage. We've got to play those and play those strongly. Otherwise, we're going to leave our country for future generations worse off than what we've had. How are we going for time, Roman? Just a couple of things I'd like to also comment on. You've heard the Labor Party today going out, we're stopping foreign investors from buying houses, right? This is their simple gaslighting, misleading the public, right? Foreign investors have always been prohibited from buying existing houses. Right? Then there's no change to new houses being built. So that was always there for foreign investors. What they have changed is people that are here as temporary residents could previously buy established Australian houses. Now they are saying, if you are a temporary resident here for study or for work for a short period of time, you can buy a house, but it has to be a new build, something that's newly been constructed, not an established house. So you see this, I see this thing, oh, you're stopping foreign investors. It's simply not true. It's simply, like everything they do, they spin and they lie and they mislead us with every single policy. The other one quickly also is, I think, the most important distinction between the Libertarians and the Labor, Liberal and other parties, and that is on freedom of speech. Remember, the Americans put in their constitution as not the Second or Third Amendment, as the First Amendment, the protections on freedom of speech, because they believe without freedom of speech, you've got nothing. And all freedoms flow from having freedom of speech. We've seen in this country the greatest attacks on freedom of speech over the last couple of years in our nation's history. Remember, it was the Mis and Disinformation Bill was originally Liberal Party policy. Paul Fletcher, the Minister for Communications, I don't know that he may have taken it down there, but he still had it up on his website when we were having the debate about the Mis and Disinformation Bill. The Liberal Party wanted to hand these powers over to the Safety Commissioner to act basically as the arbiter of truth to work out what Australians could and could post online and what we could and couldn't hear. That was Liberal Party policy. And we only defeated that, I say we defeated that, it was Australians from all around the world, all around the nation, acting independently, that wrote to those independent senators and got one after the other to change their mind. And the Libertarian Party, we were leading that fight. We were the ones that put the rally on up in Speaker's Corner, up in Sydney. We were the ones that put the rally on down in Melbourne to kick this off, to kick the protests off against it. And I didn't think we could win, but we won that battle. We won that and we stopped that. Thank goodness we stopped it, because that was just an appalling piece of legislation. I think that a government would set up what was de facto Ministry of Truth. Because the other attacks have come recently with this so-called hate speech bill. Again, the complete overreach of what was needed. They saw hate speech is terrible. Yes, it is, but there's already laws that stop that. They've extended this enormously. They've extended it to political opinion. It's actually written in the legislation. And to think that the Liberal Party and One Nation abstained, but the Liberal Party went and voted for this. This is not the Liberal Party that I once stood for and belonged in. So we've got the election coming up. We should be doing everything we can to help guys like Raymond. So my message to you guys is, if you feel for your country, you are, and you value and you think your country's going down the wrong track, and that's why you're here tonight, get in and help Raymond. Volunteer to stand on a booth. If we stand on a booth, we want to send a message to these major parties that what they are doing is heading this nation in the wrong direction. And hopefully, my aim is to try and get back in that Senate. It's the Senate is where you can really have some influence. We've seen some great work from guys like Jerry Rennick in the Senate, what one person can do if they get in there to hold all these government bureaucrats accountable. So that's my aim for this election. We know it's going to be tough, but it's going to be up to people like you to get out there, firstly help on election day, and in the meantime, recruit as many friends as you can. I'll put this presentation up on my social media pages. Share it with your friends. Get them to have a look. Get them to realise how the policies of both the major parties are sending this country in the wrong direction and sending us broke. If we can do that, if we can send a message, we can reverse track, and hopefully we can fulfil what I believe is our sacred duty as Australians. And that is to pass this country on to our kids and grandkids in a better shape and greater opportunities than what we inherited. That's what our aim should be. Thanks everyone for listening. Happy to take a few questions.
Thank you, Craig. Questions for Craig?
So where do you see Australia heading, at least from the political stage, in the next 10 years, the Dark 2030 agenda? As you may have seen, a timeline of the scale of the equal agendas that they want to do.
Yes.
Have they amended that in the world stage?
No, You're right, there's a lot of evil agendas that they want to do to the place. Where are we going to go to? My great concern this next election is that the way the seats balance out and where the swings are, Labor are not going to be able to retain their majority. Right? And I can't see the Liberal Party getting a big enough swing. They're going to have to get like something like a 52-48 two-party preferred vote to be able to form 52.5 to form their own government themselves. So we're likely to have a situation for the next 3 years as we're going to have those Teal independents deciding who forms government. Now, either way you do it, if it's a Labor and Green government, if you think Albanese was bad this 3 years, wait till he's 3 years with Labor and Greens. And if we get Peter Dutton with being held hostage by the Teals and their climate agenda, I don't know whether we'll be much better off. So the next 3 years, I think, are going to be really difficult for this nation. I hope more and more people will wake up, and I think it takes a real shock for people to wake up. Like I think all these people that love their renewable energies, I think the best way to wake them up, let them get stuck in a lift in the city, right, for a couple of hours, and with their mobile phone not working. Let them wake up that way. So I can see in the short term, we're going to have to go through quite a bit more pain until we can get enough Australians to wake up about the really wrong direction that we're heading. And that's why I'm running with the Libertarian Party. That's why I've got so many other people around the country putting their hand up to argue these points here. Follow?
Just subsequently on that question,
yes.
What is their agenda for the next 10 years?
Oh, the globalist agenda is you will own nothing and you will be happy. That's the agenda. The housing prices are... We know a generation of kids at school that can't sit down and do... If I was in school, I'd sit down and do the sums. What the average... The median price in Sydney, not the average, the median price, is $1.6 million for a house. So if I can find the most rundown place in Sydney for $1 million, I think, well, I've got to save 200 grand for a deposit, and then I've got to borrow $800,000. And I sit and I do the sums. I can't make it add up. So we've given a whole generation of kids have given up, and that changes the entire structure of your society. If you've got a generation coming through that, well, I know I can't own anything, what's the point of working hard, investing, building a family, planning for the future? If you know you'll never be able to own a piece of Australia, how can you, when the flag comes up and the beautiful blue flag flies with the national anthem comes up, I feel something in my heart. How's a generation of kids going to feel if they've been priced out of the market and can't even own a piece of Australia? That's what we've got to fight for. So it's a globalist agenda. It's a small group of people that think they are smarter than everyone else, and the world would operate better if they could control everyone. What they do, where they work, what they think, what they read. That's why we've got to fight back, and that's why a libertarian agenda is the complete opposite of what you see from these World Economic Forum people.
So given that for the last nearly 2 decades we've had no investment in coal, how is anyone going to be able to turn these things back on? I mean, we've already started to, I think it's Iran, they're going to return back on at the cost of about 64 billion to actually, basically retrofit it. I mean, it's not a cheap investment to actually do that. Something else needs to.
Look, it's a very good point. How are you going to attract the investment? Because from a coal-fired power station if you're going to invest your money into a coal-fired power station, it's a 40-year at least lifespan. So you've got to put the money up front and work out what you're going to get back for 40 years. And most people doing those calculations are probably going to be dead by the time it gets to the end of the 40 years. So it's a problem. So what you simply do is you say, we have an auction for a certain amount of baseload power that comes into the grid, right? And if you can supply that, guarantee that power with big batteries and solar power, good luck to you. I tell you, the sums don't add up. The only sums that will add up is black coal, and you've got to give them a set contract to supply that power for several decades so that they can have the investment certainty. That is the only way to do it, because anyone's also frightened of a future Labor Greens Teal government that will come and change the rules on them. So that's why you've got to have that locked in a contract, that we need a certain amount of baseload power in the grid, otherwise, so the lights will go out and the prices will go through the roof.
And I'm definitely for coal. The next point is just the whole principle of, it's really sad that Australia has actually fallen into the trap about this, net zero, because we're already net positive.
That's right.
We already actually absorb many multiple times the amount of CO2.
What he's talking about is all the vegetation that we have around Australia. So what we emit from our industry, our vegetation in Australia soaks it all up.
And so that just feeds into your last two slides about the whole principle about globalisation and destroying the manufacturing industry in Australia because we can't actually pollute because of net zero.
Yeah, 100% right, Jim. Yep.
Yeah, I thought the American election was stunning how wrong the media got it. I saw one clip, there were two I'm not sure, one of the pro Kamala Harris and Biden,
Yes.
and they were looking at all the states where they thought she was going to be doing better
Yes,
than Trump, and there was none. That was completely embarrassing. I mean, to me, Trump had a third of the finance. He had all the rock stars were going.
That's
for
right.
Yet he still won. He found a way to get like Joe Rogan and those kind of things. I feel like that was a good way to usurp the media and get his own thing going. I feel like if anyone has got to make a dent in Australia, because all that information that you're talking about is not getting out.
I know,
You're
yeah.
seeing that.
One of the great first we have is the ABC. The ABC don't mention any of this.
No.
We've had all these so-called wonderful hydrogen future that we're going to have. They've all given up the ghost all around the country, whether it's Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia. They've all looked at the numbers. This green hydrogen doesn't work. Is the ABC reporting any of that? No. Is the ABC reporting anything about China's increase in coal-fired power station capacity? No. The ABC mislead more by what they don't report than what they do report. So that's why also one of our policies, we say, defund the ABC and make it a voluntary scheme. Rather than compulsory take your taxes, let's have on our tax return a special box sort of thing. How much would you like to donate to the ABC? Right? And all these woke leftists can tick that box and write a number in and they can voluntarily pay more taxes to fund the ABC. That to me makes more sense. And then the ABC can go and do whatever they want, be as leftist as crazy as they want sort of thing. So, but with Trump, to me, it's been the last couple of weeks. It's been like it's like a footy team wins the grand final every week, every day. When you get up and you see the things that he's done, especially policies that I know I've personally been arguing for well over a decade. And so, bash bills, you're bashing your head here against the wall, and to see him just come up one after the other, executive order sign, getting out of the World Health Organization, that was another, I think, great important step sort of thing. So we've just got to keep watching that. And the thing is, the good thing about it, I don't think we're now going to be able to put these harsh restrictions on free speech that Labor and the coalition plan, because Trump is likely to retaliate with tariffs against us.
I was going to ask you, how much do they talk about the Uniparty, Labor and Liberal? I mean, how much are they actually on the same page? I mean, you would know behind the scenes.
Okay, let me give you an example. Kevin Rudd. He's the worst person that Australia could have to be the ambassador for Australia under President Trump, right? If Biden was there, by all means, let Kevin, you stay there, right? You've made all these, terrible comments about Trump, like he's an idiot, the village idiot, he's the worst, president ever. And the Biden administration loved you, Kevin, and you'll get the red carpet rolled out to you for the Biden administration. But under Trump, Trump's not even going to talk to you. We need someone like, we've got billions of dollars of exports into the US. We've got their livelihoods, their businesses, all rely upon access to that US market. We need to have, and we're paying for it, right? Rudd's on a couple of $100 grand, about $500 grand a year as the ambassador over there, plus the accommodation and all the staff and bits and pieces, right? So we're paying for it. We need the very best person to be there to represent our interests. Now, I asked Peter Dutton that, and Peter Dutton goes, my instinct is to keep Kevin there.
That's right.
If you can't see that that's how the Uni Party protecting each other and looking after their mates, we saw recently the legislation they put through Parliament, what they call the electoral reform, right? That's given both those major parties about an extra tens of millions of dollars of public money to run their election campaigns, but it limits the amount independents can do and minor parties can do. It tilts the playing field towards the two major parties. So there's a lot of it. A lot of the debate in Parliament is all fake debate. All these things are like decided. When you turn to Parliament, you think the debate's important on the floor of the Parliament. That's where they get in and debate issues and go backwards and forwards. It's not. The debate's all just show for show.
Yeah.
Everything's decided behind the scenes. They make up their mind. They sit down, officers. Will you get this through? They make out. They might argue over a few minor points.
I mean, I've heard them talk about a gag order if there's something they both want through. Is that actually a thing, and how do they?
It is okay.
Go about doing that?
I'll give you an example of what I was talking about. I was making a speech on hydroxychloroquine in the last Parliament, and we're in what's called the Federation Chamber, which is it's like a secondary debating chamber. So when there's a lot of work things going on, they move part of the Parliament to this Federation Chamber. And I was quoting from peer-reviewed studies and quoting what the best medical minds in the country were telling us. Right? The later guys got up and said, "I move that the member no longer be heard." And that means there then has to be a vote down in the House to what the Federation Chamber does. So that closed down the debate. I was simply completely and utterly gagged from that. I couldn't even finish my speech upon it. Right? The other gag order they pushed through was on the recent one was the hate speech legislation. Okay. So remember, our Senate is meant to be a house of review. Right? They're meant to review the legislation. The bill comes from the House of Representatives, and they both Labor and Liberals. Okay, we've got 1 hour to debate this. So you've got 76 senators, so we've got 1 hour to debate these issues, and then after that we're going to have a vote. But because they knew if it hadn't got, the reason they did that is that they knew if the public had have found out and looked at the intricacies of the bill and started to talk about it and debate it, as we do with the misinformation bill, the public would arc up and there'd be enough response to put pressure on some of the MPs to change, the independent MPs to change their vote. But an hour, that's what they vote for. There's an hour, and after the hour goes, cut. Okay, sorry, no more debate, let's have a vote. That's the gag orders that they put through. Yep.
Just that one question. You said that obviously atomic energy will be in the future mix. Australia does have 75% of these access to uranium.
Yes.
It makes sense to go that way.
Yes, yeah.
The Koreans said they can build a reactor between 8 to 12 years and multiple reactors in Australia. They can fill that. Other countries can as well. The one question I did hear a scientist talk about is that when you talk about disposal of uranium a year, whatever it is, Australia has the most geographically stable place to put it,
Yes.
which happens to be South Australia. But given that 55% of Australia is now owned by Indigenous people, that most stable land is Indigenous land. So the situation isn't a scientific issue to get rid of it, it's going to be a political issue. How do you think that can go?
First of all, I got elected in 2010, and Lucas Heights, so it's 5 kilometres from my office. They've got a big warehouse where they hot store all the nuclear waste. It's low level, it's in big drums. The high level waste, they shipped it off to France, and it came back, and it's sitting in a big, it's about the size of a 20-foot shipping container in a big cylinder. It looks like a big gas cylinder. It's sitting down in a shed with a concrete floor and what do you call it, steel, sort of like aluminium cocoon sort of there. But it's just sitting there. Now that was meant to go at a place called Muckety Station in the Northern Territory. That was in 2010 when I was first elected. They arced up about that. Muckety Station finally got cancelled. Then they went and get somewhere in South Australia. That's now been given to us. So it's taken 15 years, and we've yet to be able to find a location to put, so we're going to store that nuclear waste. So it's stored in my electorate. I said 5 kilometres away, just in sheds. Now, you're right, the problem is how are we going to legislate this stuff because of the states' rights, because of all these Aboriginal groups who can protest and say no, right? Bob Hawke was in favour of this. Bob Hawke knew if we said, look, we'll take the world's, we've got the most geographically safest, there's terrorists are not going to get to it in the middle of the desert, right? You've got it isolated, you've got geographic, so we could be the richest country in the world. We could double everyone's pension if we decide that we want to own the nuclear cycle ourselves from the time the uranium gets dug up out of the ground till it comes back and we store it. We can do these things. And that's why I think we're far better. And you're right, the Koreans say, Remember, to build a nuclear power station in this country, first you have to repeal the existing legislation. Now, I can't see under any circumstances how the coalition is going to have the numbers in the Senate to repeal that law. Politically, right? So at best it's going to take another 3.5 years until you get a Senate that could repeal it before you can even start to do it. Then imagine like all the environmental processes they have to go through to try and build a nuclear power station. And meanwhile, if you saw that first graph I had, our coal-fired power stations are coming down like this. Right? So this is why I say we've got to start now. We can get coal, we know we can get new coal running up in 3 years from the time. We can put them on the sites that already exist. Right? And then 15, 20 years down the track, let's put our money today into research and development so we can then get the best, cheapest technology that's the next of the next cycle of technology that's coming through, rather than just take what's off the shelf available at the moment from Korea. So I can't see how that's going to lower electricity prices. It might hold them stable, it might stop the lights from going out at certain times, but I can't see how as a nation it's going to give us any competitive advantage. Yep.
Craig, thanks for coming down to the Southern Highlands, much appreciated, and thanks for what you did through COVID as well. Do we have an advertising budget, like Palmer, or the Libertarian? Because what you're saying is a no-brainer. You've got to be an idiot to think otherwise, so, which is quite possible. But, you know, we need an advertising budget to get this message across, because the Libs and the Labor Party are not going to do it.
It would be nice to have an advertising budget like Clive, but it's a bit. But then again, look, I don't want to speak negatively of Clive. He's done a couple. He bought that hydroxychloroquine for the country, and to think that was an absolute crime what they did. The peer-reviewed science on that now is absolutely crystal clear that it was an effective treatment, and far more effective. The latest study was done one. It was peer-reviewed, double-blind, randomised controlled trial, whatsoever. They hid the results of the study for 800 days. Finally published and shown it's highly effective, right? So Clive was 100% right on that. But the difficulty with Clive is, and I said, look, it's his money, right? So he gets to decide how it's spent. And he has certain ideas about how advertising budgets should be spent. From my experience, he's not the type of guy to say, here's some money, go out and work out how to do it by yourself. So we're up against it with that. This is why little fundraising events count, everything counts. And I think, Raymond, if you're doing something for fundraising, rather than just ask for, give me $100, give me $200 for it, right? Say, look, can you pay for 50 core flutes for me? And the core flutes are $10 each. So can you pay $500 for 50 core flutes, right? Can you buy my how to vote cards? Right? That might be $1,000 for how to vote cards. This is a flyer I want to distribute around the electorate. Can you help pay for that? So we're going to have to fundraise ourselves. We've got a bit of a program that we're working on. We've got to keep punching the social media. This is where I think everyone in this room counts. Right? You all should have a social media account on all different platforms. And if you haven't, find the youngest person in your family and get them to set it up for you. That's the easiest way. Right? And when the way the algorithms work, if I'll post this, I'll put this up on YouTube. Right? Now, the more people that watch it and put comments on it, I'll put it on Twitter as well, the more people watch it and put comments on it, the further their algorithms spread it. So sometimes I can put something up on Twitter, for example, if no one really likes it or puts like or comment or shares, right, it might get 1,500 likes. Okay? If people like it and share it and make comments, it gets 100,000 likes. So every time you click a like to something or put a comment on it, the comment can even be just a smiley face. Right? Or every time you press share, that helps spread the message with the algorithms. So that's one thing I think it's very important that everyone gets involved in help spreading that message. And in the meantime, we'll keep fighting and we'll do our best. Because I always say that the science, the data, the evidence is all on our side. On their side, our opponent's side, it's emotion and hysteria and feel good. Right? We're going to follow the path of rational, evidence-based policy. Just if you go through here, you're right, it's a no-brainer if we get the message out. I think we're done, Raymond. Oh, just quickly, thanks everyone. I've got a lucky door, 2 lucky door prizes as well. I'm going to draw them at the end. The first one of these, $1 billion notes. Now, as you see, we've got Ned Kelly on them, and with a gun. And funny, the Reserve Bank said, oh, you've breached our copyright. You've breached our copyright, like you've copied the designs. I said, hang on, there's a provision in the Copyright Act for parody and satire. It says, we're having Ned Kelly with a gun and a banknote. Is it not parody or satire? Right? Now, the reason I printed those up is that our debt is about to pass $1 trillion, federal debt. So, $1 trillion is 1,000 billion dollar notes. So 1,000 of those is our national debt coming up just February. So there's 2 of those. And the other one, Brad, just pass it to us. The other lucky door prize tonight is a bottle. This is the latest wine release in the Australian market. It's called Albo's Vino. The picture, okay. And it's marketed as Australia's worst wine. And the wine, I think, is W-H-I-N-E, right? and the byline of the byline, that beautiful crisp taste from the heart of our The byline is sweet at first, but leaves an unpleasant aftertaste. That's what I can get right now. Thanks, everyone.